As you continue to follow the Audience Lab process, what's going to happen is you're going to begin to scale horizontally in these $25 increments inside your Audience Lab. Then at some point you're going to ask, well, when do I start to scale, right? When do I start to crank things up? Well, you may, if you're looking ahead, you may see that we have what we call a scale lab. And the question becomes, when do I actually move into the scale lab? When do I consider my Audience Lab done? Well, first of all, the Audience Lab is never done. It's an ongoing thing. But the question of when we move to the scale lab has a few variables. The first variable is we want to be stable inside the Audience Lab at $500 per day. If you think about it, if we were running, we had a few super ad, maybe 2 or 3 super ads that are starting to gain traction in there, and we're running $25 ad sets. If we're running 500 a day and we're above our break even, and ideally between break even and target or even above target, that's only 20 ad sets. We can get to $500 a day at $25 increments in 20 ad sets. And that's not a crazy amount to manage. Some campaigns we've run are 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 ad sets wide in the Audience Lab. So I'm telling you, you don't have to think about scale until you have gotten to at least that $500 threshold. So that's kind of our rule of thumb. The $500 is that first threshold in the Audience Lab that we continue to run in there and continue stabilizing things in there and testing things in there before we move into this scale lab. Now, when you get to the scale lab, you're gonna learn that there are different ways to scale. There are different types of campaigns. It's more of a buffet style versus like a 5-course meal in order, right? You're gonna get to pick what makes the most sense. So before doing that, you're gonna have to move with some proven assets. We don't wanna go with unproven variables into a higher spend environment. That's just foolish because scaling and advertising is an amplifier. If we give it bad stuff, it's gonna amplify bad stuff. And so the requirements for moving on from the Audience Lab into the scale lab is first, we need to bring in 2 to 3 what we call winning ads. So a winning ad is defined by something that is working 50% of the time with any audience. So if we're following our process, right, we begin with 2 super ads and we test those against different audiences, and we're gonna continue that process. Well, if those 2 super ads, let's say right off the bat, both of them are winning and above our break even in at least 50% or more of the audiences, then that means that's a super ad, because it doesn't matter what audience I take the super ad to, it means that a majority of the time it's winning. And so that's the first rule. We're gonna take 2 to 3 winning ads and we're gonna be able to carry those into the scale lab as assets. The second thing is that we're gonna take a handful of winning audiences so that we can stack them, meaning we're gonna just stack them all together inside ad sets that we can really scale into. Now here's the key. It's a handful, meaning we need multiple. We're not just gonna move one audience into the scale lab. If you're at 500 a day inside your Audience Lab, it means you've tested a lot of audiences and you probably have some things that are doing pretty well as a couple ads that are doing pretty well. So if we've done that, we're then gonna have to take in a couple of those audiences and we're gonna begin to stack those, and they have to stack up to being big enough to scale into. Now, while I wish I could tell you there's an ideal stackable audience size to scale into, I can't. And I've talked about this when I talk about the ideal customer size or the ideal audience size, because if you're in New Zealand, you have a way smaller market than the United States. If you're in a smaller country than the United States, we have pretty big audiences we can stack into. And so it's gonna depend on where you're at and what your niche is. And so it's gonna vary for everybody as far as how big the audience stack should be. If you're in the United States, we need a solid 5 million or more to really kind of scale into, but it's gonna vary. So what you need to do is just kind of take some of them that you've seen, and by the time you get to 500 a day, you should have an idea of what is gaining some degree of traction. Now, a winning audience is defined similar to the ads as by working 50% or more of the time with a winning ad. So if I'm launching, I'm gonna use Pacific Hound. If I'm launching and I have dog collars and I'm launching the dog collars and I've launched multiple times into it and I've followed the Audience Lab process and I've been able to duplicate into it in 2 out of 3 times, more than 50% of the time, it's actually getting above my break even or hitting my target and hitting what I need inside the Audience Lab, then I'm gonna have a great degree of confidence in bringing that over. So a winning audience is defined by working 50% of the time with a winning ad. And as a reminder, the Audience Lab will always be happening. It is a continual process of being able to scale within that, finding audiences, finding ads, and then you're gonna simultaneously move some of those assets over here and you're gonna begin to scale inside of the Scale Lab. You will continue scaling in both areas, validating things and finding audiences that work, finding ads that work, and then starting to amplify them. So if that's where you're at right now, if you've gone through this process, you've gotten traction in the Audience Lab, you're finding some confident ads that are continuing to win more than 50%, audiences that are winning more than 50%, then and only then can we move into some higher spend areas inside the Scale Lab.